Guys, to say this is a bucket list interview for me would be an understatement. I am so excited to have prolific author and keynote speaker and all around good guy, Todd Henry, join us for the Ripple Effect podcast today. I learned about Todd's work through my good friend Maria Gatling and one other friend who's really, really engaged in the creative space who wishes to be nameless. But the book that I learned of Todd's work was The Accidental Creative, Learn How to Be Brilliant Under Pressure. He has written many other books: Die Empty, Unleash Your Best Work Every Day, Herding Tigers, Be the Leader Your Team Needs, Brave Habit, Rise to the Moment Every Day, Daily Creative, Stay Prolific, Brilliant, and Healthy. Several of these are on my next reading list. Louder Than Words, Develop Your Voice, Sharpen Your Vision, and Master Your Days. This guy is busy all the time and putting out brilliant work all day long. He also has a fantastic podcast called The Daily Creative that I think is definitely worth listening to and checking out. I've had it on many of my long bike rides. The guy is just amazing. I love listening to him, and I'm so grateful. This took quite an effort to get him on board. We only have him for a short window, and I'm super excited that he agreed to be on the Ripple Effect podcast. So let's get rolling. Hey, Todd.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
I really want to thank you for taking the time to join me today and be a part of the Ripple Effect podcast. I know I have you for a very short window, but I appreciate you making time. I was just saying in your introduction, all the books, all the things that you're doing, I feel completely honored that you made some time in your schedule for this conversation. And I'm just amazed that we were able to make it happen because I am such a huge fan of your work. I came across your book, The Accidental Creative. I had reached out to you initially, and I know you were in the throes of another writing project at the time. But I just am grateful that you continue to respond to my emails and your willingness to get together for a conversation. So first and foremost, I just want to thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you. I'm so grateful for the kind invitation. I love the work that you're doing, and I apologize it's been so difficult for us to connect. It seems like the timing has never been right until now. And as I mentioned in the email for this interview, I'm on the road a ton
Yeah.
this month, and so I was glad we were able to find a time that worked.
Well, I definitely appreciate it, and I'm grateful, and I want to be respectful of it because I know that you've got a short window. So I want to dive right into this, and I want for those that have not read your books or not seen you speak or haven't listened to the podcast, I want to have you give them some sense of what you do and why you're passionate about it.
Yeah, so I like to informally quip that I'm an arms dealer for the creative revolution. And what I mean by that is I see it as my job to really equip creative leaders and teams, which means people who have to go to work, solve problems under pressure every day, to equip them with the mindset, with the tools, with the practices that they need to be effective every day. We often take for granted that talented people will just do great work. And unfortunately, that's a myth.
Yep.
Talent will get you in the game, but your practices keep you at the table. And so, what I do is teach talented, ambitious people how to stay in the game, how to produce the best work of their life, how to lead other people, what those people need from them as a leader in order to be effective, because leading uncertain creative work is a unique challenge. And so that's really where I've dedicated the last 20 years of my life, is to understand, well, I led creative teams before that, but then helping others understand some of the things that I was learning and really researching about what talented, ambitious, creative people need and how to give it more consistently.
So what was it that pushed you towards when you were teaching other people on other teams that you're like, hey, I can go out and do this, but I want to broaden this message and get it out to the wider audience? I think creativity, for at least from my perspective, is such a vital skill set that I think
Mm.
there's a lot of people out there that think they aren't creative or don't know how to tap into that, and or think, hey, that's exclusively reserved for musicians or artists or
Right.
great writers. But it's something that everybody at every level, at every role, really needs to lean into and embrace. So what was it
Right.
about bringing that message in general to the wider audience? What was it that kind of moved you in that direction?
So I was leading a team of about 40 people at the time, and I was a creative director. And I went looking for, as a young creative director, resources to help me understand how to lead this team of incredibly ambitious, talented people more effectively. And I came up short. I couldn't find much of anything. And so I started turning to some of my fellow creative directors at some of the agencies here in town. And I would say, hey, how are you keeping your team healthy? And they're like, what do you mean? They looked at me like I had two heads. What do you mean? Healthy? Like we just burn through people and bring in a fresh crop. And I thought, well,
Yeah.
that doesn't seem right. And so I started a podcast in 2005 called The Accidental Creative. And the idea was, let's explore what it takes to do this well. And I was sharing some of the things I discovered that were working, but I also would bring other people on to talk about what they were learning. And that podcast just grew really quickly. And so over the course of about 5 years, I realized I think that there's a huge need here. I was getting invited to go speak at companies. So I would take a red eye to go speak at Mattel. Then I would like take a red eye back to the other coast to be in a meeting the next morning. And I was trying to work all this in and use vacation time to do these things. And I thought, I think
While working full time. Yeah.
while working full
Yeah.
time, I
Yeah.
had a family, 3 kids, so trying to figure that out. And so really just decided I think there's a need for this. And then fortunately, the big sort of signal was I was offered a book deal for The Accidental Creative from Penguin Random House. And that was kind of
Wow.
my first signal that, okay, I think I am onto something here.
There's something there.
Um,
Yeah.
and so the first book came out and it did well. And fortunately, that led to the second book and the third and the fourth, the fifth. Now I'm on number 7. So it's fortunately sustained now for the last almost 20 years. But, it's really just a result of seeing a need in the market and realizing I think I'm kind of uniquely equipped to be able to help provide a service that will fill that need.
What is it that's most surprised you about this 20-year journey?
So what's funny to me is that what's new is old and what's old is new. And we see this all the time, right? Like something that I've been talking about for 20 years, somebody will hear and it's like, what is this profound revelation that has
Yeah.
just dropped down from the head? And I'm like, well, a lot of people have been talking about that for a really long time. I'm not the only one. And and then sometimes there'll be something that you feel like is really profound that people are like, yeah, that's old news. So it's really interesting to me how sort of collective wisdom over the last 20 years. I mean, there was no such thing as like social media. There was no
Right.
such thing as, I
Right.
mean, podcasting was in its extreme infancy. I hear people all the time saying, oh, people talking about their show saying, I'm an OG podcaster. I started in 2017. I'm like, I'd already been going for
Yeah.
12 years at that
Yeah.
point, right? So like we're talking about like really like nascent technologies.
Yeah.
And so we have such an embarrassment of riches right
Yeah.
now. And that to me is just like it's such a gift. And it's also in some ways kind of a curse because I feel like we're inundated with advice and with a lot of, there are a lot of people who are sharing advice that maybe isn't time tested in the
Yeah.
same way. And so I think that's something that we always have to be careful of is, just because it resonates and seems as true doesn't mean it actually is true. So I think we have to have a higher filter for what we allow into our lives, into our minds, into our practices.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. What do you think the biggest challenges are for people that are maybe struggling to really embrace that approach to life? Is it that there is so many distractions? There's so many different things thrown at us on a given day that it's hard to actually really sort of hone in and focus in one particular area? Or is it that, it's just everybody's a bit too overwhelmed right now to really understand or appreciate the value of really focusing on that creative side?
Yeah. So, I mean, the challenging thing about creativity is it's about solving problems. You mentioned earlier, people think it's about, music or
Yeah.
painting or designing, and it certainly is. But we often conflate creativity and art. Creativity is problem solving. So if you have to solve problems, whether you're an engineer, a leader, a manager, entrepreneur, then you have to be creative because you're solving problems. And the thing about creativity specifically is that we never know when the idea is going to come along. We never know when that flash, that connection, that aha moment is going to happen. And we're always working toward it. And so, what I've discovered in my work is that we have to focus less on tasks, which is how most of our work is organized
Yep.
in today's knowledge work world, and focus more on outcomes. So instead of saying, here's the list of 15 tasks I want to get done today. Okay, that's fine, but that doesn't account for the cognitive load that some of those tasks is going to require.
Yep.
Instead, I would rather say, here's the one outcome that if this outcome is achieved today, I will consider today a success. Meaning if I gain significant traction on solving this problem today, or if I gain some kind of insight, some kind of aha, I move the ball forward on this outcome. This is the outcome I'm trying to achieve. I'm going to solve this problem. I'm going to resolve this tension, because creativity is about resolving tension. That's all it is.
Yeah.
Then that's success. And for me, and for the people I work with, for my clients, that's really helped a lot to help them simplify instead of dealing with the overload of, I have 20 projects, and out of that probably 7 tasks I could work on right now for each project. um, Instead, okay, today is Monday, or today's Thursday, January 9th, as we're recording this. What is the one outcome today that if I achieve that outcome will move my entire body of work forward?
Ooh,
And then
I
once I
love that
achieve that,
question.
yeah, and then that means that you're making significant progress every day, regardless of how many tasks you check off your list.
I love that. And I love the fact that you're reframing it in a way that really makes it feel more cohesive as opposed to more of a drain, right? If you're looking at this, what seems like a seamlessly endless list of things that you need to do, it's easy to become overwhelmed by not really wanting to do any of them, right? It demotivates you and it becomes sort of dispiriting in a lot of ways. And if you can break it down into what's out of that pile that I can pull out, that I can make progress and I can do something significant with, that's going to help. I kind of liken that when I coach, folks. It's like the decisions that I make today. What am I going to thank myself for a year from now, right? And
Yeah.
same kind of concept, but I like how you frame it in a way that basically re-energizes and sort of repositions it in the mindset, which drives more motivation and inspiration to actually want to get in there and do the work.
Well, and that's what we're trying to do, right? I mean, the goal is to wake up in the morning with an objective and to know, like, this is where I'm going to funnel all of my resources toward this, whatever this outcome, whatever this objective is, until I achieve it. And then once I achieve it, I can move on to something else. But the reality is, we're not being paid to check tasks off of lists. We're not being
No,
paid to sit at a desk and stare at a monitor all day and reply to email. I mean, that's really the cost that we pay in order to do
sure.
the actual work that we're paid for, which is to produce results, to solve problems, to create value out of nothing. I mean, that's really what we're paid to do as creative professionals. And so when we talk about that, we're talking about outcomes. We're talking about what is the tangible, and that's the other that's the other unique challenge of creative work, is that so often you and I are doing a little piece of a much bigger project, and it's hard to point to something at the end of the day and say, I did that,
Yeah.
right? Because
Yeah.
we're just like one little voice in a much bigger project that's going on. When we break our work down into desired outcomes, at least at the end of the day, we can say, hey, regardless of how this fits into the bigger picture, I did that. Today,
Yeah.
I did that. I created that value. That was something I did. It was hard. It took me time and effort and talent to do, and I did that. And that's very gratifying for creative professionals whose work is largely up here. It's not
Yeah.
out there, it's largely up here.
There's so much that I'd love to dive into here, but one of the things that really strikes me that I'd love your take on is that from a leadership perspective, I know you've written books on that as well, and how you tie that into your work. But having a leadership or executive team that understands the value of creativity and allowing your people to have time, dedicated time for free thinking, and dare I say, legitimize daydreaming, right? And just the opportunity for the ideas and the sparks of creative inspiration to flow. You can't often do that necessarily sitting in front of a computer. You can't often do that being attached to your chair at the office. Sometimes you have to get up and go walk the building or go outside or sit under a tree or do these things. Or as I talked to recently, another person in the creative space, just the value of looking out the window. That you and I probably grew up in a similar type work environment where those things were looked at as goofing off, or you weren't really focused, or you weren't really doing the work that you were being paid to do. But that's where I think there's this disconnect for a lot of leaders, that they don't recognize the value of that deep thinking, right? And
Mhm.
that deep thinking leads to deeper work, and that deeper work leads to the results and the outcomes that you're talking about. So when you work with an organization or you have a leader, it's like, I don't really know if we should, we're really buying into this, because our people need to be doing something. They need to have hands on a computer, they need to have a phone in their hands. How do you combat that conversation, or come back to that conversation, or challenge them to look at it from a different lens?
I love that question. There's a book by Gordon McKenzie, who's the late Gordon McKenzie, who was the former creative director at Hallmark, and he wrote a
Oh,
book called
okay.
"Orbiting the Giant Hairball," which I love the title of that book.
What a
Orbiting.
great title. Oh.
Yeah, he said basically every organization is a hairball, and as a creative professional, you have to orbit the hairball while drawing the resources, but not get sucked into the hairball, basically. And he said, imagine there's a cow and it's standing out in the middle of a field and it's grazing, it's chewing its cud, and the farmer comes along at the fence and stares at the cow for a while and says, "Hey, you lazy cow, stop eating grass and get back to making milk," right? And it's a silly scenario, but the
Yeah.
reality is that's an important part of the process of making milk. I mean, the cow
Yeah.
needs to be eating grass and the whole thing. And I think sometimes we think about the creative process in the same way. One of the beauties of the modern workforce is that we're able to measure what leads to progress, but there are certain intangibles we can't measure. There are certain
Mm.
inefficiencies that have to be baked into the creative process. The creative process is gloriously inefficient, but it wastes nothing. And that's an
Mm.
important thing for us to
Yeah.
remember, that there's nothing wasted if we're purposeful in how we approach the process, which means sometimes we have to allow for those. We have to create space. We have to intentionally carve out room for inefficiency in our process as leaders so that people have the time to connect the dots. They have the time to intuit, to synthesize, to make those sort of non intuitive jumps
Mm.
to places where if we're just telling them, I want this on my desk by 5 p.m., no matter what, get busy, start making the clickety clack sound on your keyboard. If that's what we're telling them, then they're going to think, okay, well, just tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Right. Because really what you just want a result. You don't care if it's a great result. You just want a result. And so
Yeah.
that's the really difficult thing. So in Herding Tigers, my book Herding Tigers, I discovered there are two things that talented people need from their leader. The first is stability. They need a stable playing field on which to do their work. They need clarity of expectations, clarity of process, clarity of relationship. They need to know that the rules of the game aren't going to change halfway through the game, right? That they can take some risks knowing there's going to be ground underneath of them. The second thing they want is challenge. They want to be pushed. They want to try new things. They want to take risks. They want to go to the edge of their abilities. They want to introduce questions that might feel a little dangerous to the organization. They want to question the process sometimes. The problem is those two things exist in tension, stability and challenge. As you stabilize, you
Yeah.
tend to make things less challenging. As you make things more challenging, you tend to destabilize. And so part of our job is to manage that tension as a leader, which means creating bounded autonomy, freedom within limits. So we have limits because creative people need limits. Complete freedom is false freedom. It's not helpful to the creative process. We need a bounding arc to focus our energy, to focus our attention. But we need some freedom within those boundaries to explore, to ask questions, to try new things, to go to places maybe the leader wouldn't have thought of otherwise. So many leaders, Steve, hire talented, ambitious people, and they spend their entire career trying to turn them into little versions of themselves, right? They just control the work. Like, why did you hire them to begin with?
Yeah.
If you're not going to let them do the thing you hired them for, they're going to come up with ideas you never would have imagined if you
Exactly.
just give them the freedom to do the work you've hired them to do. And so that's part of the challenge is we have to bake in that inefficiency, which means as a leader, I have to go to my manager and be able to make a business case for why Steve is staring out the window for 25 minutes instead of going clickety clack on the keyboard, right? Like I need to be able to talk to my manager and say, hey, trust the process. We're going to create more value on the other side of this because we're allowing them the freedom to do these things they need to do as part of their process. Because Walt Disney. I have you can't see it. It's behind me. It's behind the backdrop behind me right now.
Okay.
But there's on the wall. I have Walt Disney's business model from 1957,
Oh,
and it's basically it's not the original. It's a copy of his business model from 1957, but everything at the center of it, it's got all of these like arrows going out to all these different places and merchandising and music and films. But at the center of it is the creative talent of the film studio. He recognized that the idea factory was the central, most valuable gold mine of his organization. And that if he protected that idea factory, that all of the other businesses were going to flow from that, but he had to protect that creative core. And so, whatever it takes for us as managers, as leaders, as professionals, we have to do what it takes to protect the viability of our creative process, because that's the central value for everything that we do. That idea factory must be protected at all costs.
so for a leader that might be listening, and we have a wide variety of folks that tune in from an audience perspective, and I think this is going to resonate with a lot of them. You might have a leader out there being like, okay, they've sort of operated under that dictatorial kind of, you got to produce. I got to hear the clickety clack. I'm hearing what Todd's saying, but I don't know how to start. So,
Yeah.
do you recommend they work on themselves first to be able to understand and embrace the creativity? Approach, work style, lifestyle? Or is it something that is better if they're diving into the pool at the same time that they're having their teams do it and it's a cultural shift at the same time? Or what have you seen as the best execution there for a leader who might be like, I love what you're saying, I'm just not sure where to start?
So, a huge factor in all of this is trust. You can say what you want as a leader, but if your team doesn't trust that you really mean it, it's not going to matter.
Yeah.
And trust is not like a bank account. We tend to talk about trust. We use all these different analogies and metaphors. I
Yep.
mean, trust is like a bank account. You put a little bit in, you can take a little bit out as long as you keep a positive trust balance. Trust is not like a bank account. Trust is
No,
like a
it's not.
water balloon. You fill it, you fill it, you fill it, you fill it. If you puncture the water balloon, even in a tiny way, you're going to lose it in other places that really matter. And so if you're going to create, if you're going to grow a culture that is about valuing process, it's about valuing freedom to do some of these things we're talking about. The very first time you come along and say, why are you not going clickety clack on the keyboard? You're going to lose trust. Nobody's ever going to do it again. Nobody's ever going to believe you. So you have to model it for yourself and for your team. B, you have to create a permission structure for people to come to you. I'm not, so there's an almost sinister form of what I'm talking about, which is I am now going to impose upon you that you must stare out the window for 25 minutes a day, or whatever. That's not help, or everybody has an hour a day of free
Yeah.
time. That's not necessarily helpful. What you need to do is say, hey, here's what I found works for me as a leader. I want you to do what works for you. So I'm going to be having conversations with each of you, and I want you to come to me if there's something you think would help your process. If that means I need an extra hour in the morning coming in because I need to take an hour at a coffee shop because that's where my creative juices are flowing. And so I'm going to be in a little later than everybody, but I'm going to spend that hour in a coffee shop working because and then I'm going to have check-ins with you and say, how is that going? Show me the fruit of that, right? Is that really working for you, or should we try something else? But give people permission to approach you with what they think would work best for them, and then have a conversation and create a permission structure for people to do the things that work for them. Different people are going to have different needs. I mean, I would routinely take a day away back, 20 years ago. I would take a day away and say, hey, once a month, I need to go offsite. I need to go someplace, beautiful, meaningful. And I'm going to spend the whole day sitting in that place and thinking, and maybe it'd be a museum, and I'm walking around and I'm thinking about strategy, but I'm looking at different pieces of art or something. And I'm doing that with that strategic tension in my head. And I would have these little moments of aha, these little breakthroughs, because I was using stimulus in my environment to spark different kinds of ideas, right? That than I would have had if I was sitting at my desk staring at my computer screen. So it's really more about creating the permission structure for people to tell you what they need or what they think they need from their process. And will people abuse this? Probably from time to
Yeah.
time, people will abuse it. But you need to that's where accountability comes into play, right? Okay, so because the argument for you as a leader is I have to be able to make a business case for this. So if you
Yeah.
come to me and you say, I need to see a movie every Wednesday afternoon in order to be okay, great, but just understand you're going to have to prove to me how that's helping you create more value than you otherwise would, right? So you need to create a permission structure, but also accountability on the back end, knowing that this gloriously inefficient process has to be leading towards some kind of effective end game in order for us to sustain it. Otherwise, why are we doing it? I mean, the goal is to make us better, to make us more creative, to make us more productive. Which is why, by the way, things like foosball tables and ping pong and all these things that people point, Nerf guns, like people point to that stuff as like these like fun cultural things. Well, that's fine, but it doesn't really move the needle, which is why I think most people look at it and roll their eyes and go, yeah, okay, great, thank you. But what they really want is something that's going to help them be a better professional, something that's going to help them be more effective. So that's my advice: is create the permission structure, model the way, and then create accountability on the back end.
Yeah, years ago, I had the very unusual pleasure of being at the Yahoo campus when Yahoo was still kind of in its heyday, still is, but different.
Sure.
And Google in the afternoon. Actually, sorry, check that. Google in the morning, Yahoo in the afternoon. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting is we were getting a tour, and I was doing something for Google. Like you said, they have all these really nifty, neat little things: ping pong tables, foosball, pool tables, a little rock climbing thing. There were all these ways that you could invest your time and energy. And as we were walking through one of these buildings, they called it sort of, the creative playground or something equivalent, and they had these sleep pods and a really neat setup. And I said, I'm kind of surprised. Like, we were kind of, late morning, it's getting closer to lunch. There's nobody in it. Right. And the guy said, oh yeah, no, no. I mean, you actually don't want to be caught using any of this. And
Right.
it struck me
Right.
as odd, right? Because I was like, oh, well, why do you have it then? Right. Well, it's really designed to help you, blow off steam and spur your creativity, but it's really looked down if anybody ends up using it. Like, maybe after 5, or, maybe after you're supposed to, you're supposed to work from, 5 to 5, or excuse me, 8 to 5. And then you got a little bit of free time, and, Google wants you there as long as possible, because if you go play foosball at 5:15, you might come up with a great idea at 5:30, and then you'll work the rest of the night on the idea. And I thought, wow, that seems really limiting. Right. And then I go to Yahoo in the afternoon. It happened to be, they're doing an Oktoberfest, and we got an opportunity to see an environment that was really, really, really relaxed, and a lot more chill. Granted, you could argue maybe that's why they had a little bit of a downfall. I don't know, right? But at the end of the day, it was the cultural difference was vastly different. And so I asked the person that was bringing me over for that afternoon event, is this like just because you guys are doing a big, a big Oktoberfest celebration at the end of the day? I mean, they were bringing John Mayer in. It was like this whole big to do, drink out of a huge boot of beer. And it was a really cool thing. But I thought, okay, maybe everybody's hyped up over here because it's just a special day. And he's like, no, this is an everyday thing. Like, what you're going to
Hmm.
see today, like, yes, Oktoberfest is a little bit different. We got, a little bit of different food and some beer, but we do something on this, little promenade all the time. And we're doing stuff in the morning, we're doing stuff in the afternoon, we're doing stuff at night, but we trust the employees to figure out when they need to get their work done, when they can come and plug in. And he said, and we don't look down on anybody who spends more than that 15-minute allotment that most people give you in terms of a break out here doing these things, because we feel like that spurns the better set of creativity. It creates innovation. It creates, some connection for the employees to know and meet one another and bounce ideas off of or get feedback. And it really was when we went into the Oktoberfest thing, I saw people having a great time, drinking some beer, having a social thing, but there was questions happening. There was conversations happening about big stuff. And you saw people shoulder up to one another, and there was conversations, and there was troubleshooting, and there was, good, contributions from, people that were there, not feeling like they had to be judged necessarily for whatever problem or challenge they might be overcoming or what project they had to deliver, but hey, I need the help of the collective. And you just felt like everybody was in this real creative spirit and mood. Part of it could have been the beer, but most of it didn't seem like that. It seemed like it was a cultural thing.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're talking about is an informal space, like at Google, more of an informal, like, hey, any takers here? Anybody want
Yeah.
to come play ping? Versus we're going to create like a particle accelerator where we're going to be smashing people into one another
Uh-huh.
intentionally by creating these events, and that's a cultural thing. It is a very different culture,
Yeah.
right? And who knows? Maybe it was more effective to do it that way, but the point I think of what you're describing is it was intentional. The point was to bring people together. It wasn't just, hey, here's an all day open bar, come have a drink when you want to. It's more like, no, we're going to have these events, we're going to get people together, we're going to smash them into one another. They're going to talk about things, because the innovation happens when you get people bringing ideas together, asking interesting questions. So, I mean, I think that could be a very effective thing as long as it's intentional. And again, there's some bounded autonomy, there's freedom within limits there, right?
Yeah.
Because you're creating those spaces intentionally.
Yeah, I love your approach to how you're educating leadership about why this works and why it's important, and perhaps maybe the prescriptive approach that we all grew up with in terms of how you lead or manage or technically grow a company. It seems like that rule book is ripe to be thrown out and be revisited with something vastly more organic and potentially without defined rules of engagement per se. Like you said, perhaps you're setting that up so that everybody knows kind of the rules to play by, but the game is very flexible, and the opportunity to do what you need to do. You know, and you didn't say it exactly like this, but the way I interpret it was like not one size fits all, right? So you may do it
Right.
one way, I may do it another, but the two people that are working for us, they may go off in completely different capacities, but we all end up coming back to the table refreshed, re-energized, and focused on what's next, right?
Right. Because the goal, in the words of James Carse, what we're trying to do is to play an infinite game, not a finite game.
Yep.
And so many organizations historically have been set up around the finite game, which is this quarter, are we going to hit our numbers? We got to hit our numbers, which means I need to, sort of like ensure that I'm squeezing down on everybody in the organization to get as much value out of them as possible to help us hit that quarterly goal, versus we're trying to create value that's ultimately going to go out and change the world. And that's really how we're measuring our impact: is, are we still able to do the thing that we're doing, and are we growing in our capacity to do that? That's a very different mindset. That's more of an infinite game mindset versus, and truthfully, like we saw the just from a financial standpoint, we saw the outcropping of that in, some of the financial crises that we've experienced. The Great Recession, a lot of companies cut their innovation pipeline because they were trying to hit their numbers for the next quarter, and then that caught up with them 4 or 5 years later. And the ones who went on a merger and acquisition tear during that period ended up succeeding because they were able to sort of outsource their pipeline. But the ones who didn't, ended up withering and dying. And so, I mean, we see the
Great
result of
point.
that short term versus long term thinking everywhere. And so we have to have, it's an act of faith. Leadership is an act of faith. Leading creative work is an act of faith, because you have to make investments and trust that those investments are going to pay off over time, even when there's not an immediate result. And that's the hardest thing as a leader, is to have faith that you've invested wisely and that your team is going to bear fruit in the future because of those investments. The easier thing to do is just sort of like strip mine the value from your team now and have something to show for it. But if you have the patience and the faith to invest in your team and allow them to grow in their own capacity, the results could dwarf any expectation that you could possibly have imagined for your team in the future.
Ah, I love that. I know that I promised to keep this interview short in hopes that we can invite you back. There's so much more that I want to ask you. Do you have like maybe 5 minutes that I could
Sure.
just ask a few ripple questions? Because we like to do this in a way, questions that I've come up with that give us a little more insight as to our guest. And you're just so infinitely interesting. I really hope that we can find some time to come back and talk a little bit more, because there's just so many different ways that we could take a conversation like this that I think would benefit our ripplers. But first and foremost, if I'm just an individual and I'm trying to get in touch with the creative source, right? That maybe stimulated me as a young person, as a child, clearly is something that can benefit me as an adult, both from a personal satisfaction, but also a professional perspective as well, what's the first book of your books do you suggest that they read?
But that's a really good question. Probably The Accidental Creative
That's what I
because it
thought you were going to
really
say, but I wasn't sure.
yeah, yeah, it's the oldest of my books, but it's also the one that I think approaches creativity from a more tactical standpoint. You know,
Yep.
if you have to solve problems and you do that under pressure, here are some tools and techniques to help you do that more consistently. But it also applies to people who just want to tap back into their creative flow, you know,
Yeah.
and just sort of figure out how to unleash that inner creative uh, agility that they once had that maybe has gone dormant.
Awesome. Well, I went out on a flyer, but we've talked about you a fair amount in my community called the Pond, and we've used you and your book and the podcast as an example of how to get back into that, find that flow,
Mm.
find what works for you. Because, like you said, it's what works for you may be different from what works for me, but help it. That book is an outstanding read, and it's a great way for you to get re-inspired to want to tap into your own individualized approach to creativity. So I'm so honored, that I get the man, the myth, the legend here that wrote it. So thank you for that. If you were talking to a leader who's thinking about a cultural shift and tapping into this, plus embracing maybe a new approach to their leadership style, I think I have an indication of what that title might be. But what of your books, what do you suggest they start with?
I think Herding Tigers is definitely
Yeah.
the place to go, which is the subtitle is Be the Leader That Creative People Need. So it's really about how to provide the environment where talented people can thrive. And the runner up to that would be my latest book, which is called The Brave Habit, which is about making brave decisions every day because leaders have to be brave. And to lead creative teams requires bravery, requires doing hard things in the face of potential consequences, but knowing it's the right thing. And so I would say those two books, probably Herding Tigers first, and then The Brave Habit would be a close follow up.
I love that. What is a practice that you do on a daily basis to make sure that you keep fresh and recharged in your own creative habits?
Every single morning for the last 25 years, I have had an hour of study and journaling and writing and reflecting and just time alone with my thoughts.
That's
And
awesome.
this is something that, surprises people. What do you mean time alone with your thoughts? I'm like, well, I literally sit and stare off into space and I'm not meditating, but I'm also not meditating, right? I'm sort of just staring off into space. If something comes to my mind, I write it down and maybe I'll free write for a little bit about it. But the thing that I've discovered, Steve, is really interesting is so many people don't even know what's on their own mind because they're
Yeah.
so busy and we're so distracted and we're bouncing and like there could be brilliant hunches, brilliant insights that are just beneath the surface. But because you're so distracted and you're moving and you're always thinking consciously about things, you're not even aware that they're there. And so just spending time alone with your thoughts every morning and letting things come to the surface. Why do I feel tension around this? Interesting, huh? Wonder what's going on there. Oh,
Yeah.
maybe there's a problem there I'm not aware of. You don't know it. You feel it. Your body feels it, but you're not aware that it's happening. And so, just carving out that time is invaluable to me. And so many of I mean, I've had entire idea sets for books come from one 30-minute session of just sitting there. Now, the whole book didn't, obviously, there's a lot more that
Yeah.
goes into researching, right? But like the idea set for the book, the core principles in the book came from just sitting alone with my thoughts in the
Jeez.
morning. And I'm like, oh my gosh, all these things are intersecting. Wow. There's like a pattern here that I need to pay attention to. So
I had a corporate psychologist tell me one time that how you know that you have too much of that distraction is when you catch yourself saying, I had that great idea yesterday, but I can't for the foggiest remember it now. That
right.
is a pretty good indicator that you have too much going on. And their recommendation is you have to get intentional about being quiet, finding that time in that space. So I love the fact that you do that and you share your practice because I think for our audience that's such a powerful takeaway from this interview that doing that it is a game changer. I know for me, I'm a go-getter. I'm, high energy. I'm very focused. I'm highly creative, but the creativity without actually being able to sit down and figure out the plan and to sort of you know, um, configure what you want to do and how you want to do it next. Ideas are great. They're a dime a dozen, but if you can't do anything with them, then you're not really serving
Right.
yourself at the highest level. So I love that. Thank you for that tip. That was fantastic. 7-year-old version of Todd, what did he want to be when he grew up?
7-year-old, I probably wanted to be Evil Knievel, actually, at age
I love that.
7. I had the Evil Knievel, bicycle.
Yeah,
I would
you
put, like,
rev it up and then it would take
uh-huh.
off.
Well, no, 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 I had the actual bike that had, like,
Oh,
the fuel
oh, you're
tank
way
on
cooler
it
than
and the
me.
whole thing, and, I would
Oh,
I put baseball cards in the back to make it go like,
yep,
brrr,
yep,
when you rode it. I would jump ramps that were, like, not very high. But that's probably what the 7-year-old me wanted to be. As I got older, when I got into high school, I wanted to be a musician, and actually did play music for a while in my early 20s professionally for
yeah.
a handful of years before I ended up being a creative director. So, but yeah, 7-year-old me was probably Evil Knievel.
So if you weren't doing what you're doing now, you weren't this world famous author and just an inspirer of so many, what would you be doing if you weren't doing this?
That's, it's a hard question to answer because I feel like this is what's emerged over time. I didn't set out to do this. This is just where I found myself because
Yeah.
it's, as I did things, as I, put things into the world, as I made decisions, as I led other people, I just gradually sort of discovered that this is kind of what I'm wired for.
Yep.
Uh, so I don't know that I ever would have set out to do this, but looking back, it all makes perfect sense. I think most people, their lives and their careers are emergent. You discover, if you pay attention, you discover over time the thing that you're wired for. Most people want to start their life. I mean, I have two sons who are about to graduate from college, one who's about to go to college, a daughter. And I keep telling them, like, whatever you think you're going to be doing is not what you're going to be doing when you're 35. Like, you're going to
Yep.
learn things about yourself and you're going to change your mind a million times. And that's perfectly fine.
Yep.
But probably if I wasn't doing this at this point, the thing I originally wanted to do and the thing I do for fun now is make music. And so I probably would have, if I hadn't, you know, met a girl and got married and all of that, I probably would have tried to make a harder run at being a songwriter because that's really,
Uh,
and I have friends who I wrote with when I was in Nashville who have gone on to have phenomenal illustrious careers. And so that's probably where I would have spent my time, and I frankly would probably be a 52-year-old barista right now had I done that. So, which is nothing wrong with that, but I'm just saying, like, that probably is where that career path would have led me. But
I don't know. I think you're selling yourself short just based on your success for the unintended career path you took, right? I think it's pretty much a guarantee you would have been a lock to be super successful had you done that. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. I love it. What's I always find that people always ask me the question, and I always fail to ask the creatives that I actually interview, what is your preferred way to capture ideas? Is it in your notebook? And if so, what kind of notebook? Do you use any kind of app? Or what do you suggest for people to, especially somebody that's trying to tap into that creative side that needs to keep their ears and eyes tuned for opportunity for those ideas to come down at the moments that they do, and how to record them?
yeah, so I say do whatever feels good to you. So
Okay.
for some people, that's I use a combination of methods for recording ideas. I have one central place where I keep them, and I'll share that as well. I carry in my back pocket a little note card holder, and I use note cards. And I have a little Fisher
Perfect.
Space pen. I carry it around with me, and I'll write stuff down. If I have an idea or a thought, I'll write it down. An observation, I'll write it down. If I'm at home or in my office, my I usually use my iPad, and I have,
Yep.
like,
Yep.
note taking apps. As a matter of fact, even with my note cards, I will take pictures of the note card or scan it into the
Put it
note
in.
taking
Yeah.
app. Yeah, because it's just great for searchability later. But where all of that goes, ultimately, the way I archive my ideas now is in Notion. I have a
Yep.
database in Notion where I keep all of my ideas. And again, it's only because, and really Notion AI. So this is not an ad for Notion
Yeah.
because you can get really wonky with tools, and it just becomes annoying where it's like you're always searching for the perfect tool. And I've kind of
Now it's a
gotten
chore.
over that.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, then it becomes like more about tweaking the tool than it is about doing the work.
That's
But the one thing that really changed the game for me was when Notion AI came along, and I could just type in, like, I know I had an idea for this thing sometime last fall. What was the idea, and what was I thinking about when I had the idea? Or hey, I know I was journaling about something a while back. I can't remember, but it had something to do with this. And Notion AI will go in and find it, and it'll say, "Here's what you were thinking about. Here's what was going on at the time. Here's who you were talking to. Here's you know." And so just to have that level of searchability is really invaluable, because
Yeah.
probably like you, I have bazillions of ideas every day and it's hard to keep track of them. And for a while,
Yeah.
I would keep them in a notebook, in a commonplace book, and I would have to go through and find it and search it. And it's just impossible. And I fought because I love analog.
Me
I
too.
love the
Yeah.
feel of analog. Like I'm constantly like, Instagram has my number because they're constantly serving up like leather journals and leather whatever pens. This pen is the end all be all pen.
We'll both get
Um,
10 more ads of that today just because you said it out there in the world, right?
No doubt. Yeah,
Yeah.
my Echo Dot and my Google Assistant are both
It's
listening
all
right now,
yeah.
and they both
Yeah.
yeah. But what I've discovered is, like, listen, at the end of the day, it all comes down to whatever this goes into. It all comes down to whether you can find it again and
Yeah.
connect the dots. And so for me, that's Notion right now. I haven't found anything better for me.
I love it. I'm also a recent Notion convert, and I'm no, by no means an expert, but it has streamlined my approach to almost everything, and it's been a great resource. And I've tried other ones, Good Notes, and
Yeah.
notes off of my Mac, and nothing felt quite as cohesive that can be turned into a task or a project so easily as it is in Notion. So, like you
Yeah.
said, there, not necessarily a commercial. It's one of many great tools that are out there, but
Right.
if they wanted to sponsor your podcast or my podcast, we wouldn't turn them away. So,
Well, they have in the past, which is how I ended up using it, actually. They came along
that's
and wanted to
awesome. Oh,
sponsor. Yeah, this is back when we were taking ads on the show, and they came along and they're like, "We wanna buy a 2-month run on your show." And I'm like, "Huh, what is this Notion that they're
yeah,
talking about? What is Notion AI?" And I'm like,
that's
"Okay, all right."
awesome.
So,
Oh, wow, that's cool. That's really cool.
yeah.
Okay, last three real quick questions. The last question would be from a creative perspective, if you could put something on a billboard that people would see every day on the way to school or on the way home from work,
Mm.
and it was a message that you really wanted them to take to heart, what would it be?
Oh, man, that's a big question. I think it probably would be something to the effect of, and this is going to sound naive and I don't mean it to be, but it's going to be okay.
I love it.
Um, that's what I would have said to my 20 something self in my early 20s, who was literally, and I say this at threat of making myself seem less like a man because we think men don't cry, who would
Yeah.
literally like cry myself to sleep sometimes because I was
Wow.
barely making enough money to survive when I was in my early 20s, trying to make it as a musician, had this dream, had an idea.
Yep.
I was paying my rent, paying for my food, but I didn't have much left over at the end of the
Yeah.
month. And I wish I could just take that person and say, it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
It's going to be fine. You would not believe the stories I'm going to tell you about you being on stage in front of 400,000 people, telling them about a book that you wrote and inspiring people around the world, to do this thing all at once. All those people at one time, 400,000 people at one time are going to hear you talk about your book, right? Or
That's so
that
awesome.
you're going to be, you're going to go to this country and that country. And like, I wish I could take my 22-year-old self and just say, it's going to be okay. You're going to figure
Yeah.
it out. So
That's
probably
one of
it's
the
going to be
best
okay.
answers I've ever gotten. I gotta tell you, I love that.
Hmm.
Love that.
That, by the way, I want to be really clear. That doesn't deny the reality of the difficulties, the hurdles,
Sure.
the everything. It's just that I believe that at the end of the day, like if we are focused and intentional and diligent, and we work on our own character, that things are going to work together for good. I do believe that. So
Without question. I agree 100%. And that's not everything in life is gonna always be easy, but as long as you
right,
keep focused on the forward motion and recognize that more often than not, things do work out. It may not
right.
seem like it's possible or even conceivable in the moment, but I think that's some excellent advice. So thank you so much for that. When you hear the word the ripple effect, what conjures up for you? What does it mean to you?
It makes me think of a Greek proverb, actually, or this. It's reportedly a Greek proverb. A society grows great when old men plant trees in whose shade they know they will never sit. And I think that that is, for me, that's what I'm trying to do with my life. I mean, I'm over 50, I'm 52. So that's what I'm trying to do with my life, is plant seeds that I know I'm probably never going to be able to sit under the shade of those trees, but that's
Yeah.
my job now, is to plant those seeds and to hopefully create an orchard of, value, that, and those people are going to go on and plant seeds, and they'll go on and plant seeds, and hopefully, 200, 300 years from now, there will be people who are impacted by my ideas, by my life, who have no idea who I am, and that's perfectly fine, but it's because of the seeds that I planted or the ripples that I made. And so
I
that's what I
love
think
that.
of.
That's a phenomenal answer. So thank you for that as well. What ripples can I create for you?
I am always trying to figure out ways to have more people aware of the work that I'm doing, and so you're already creating ripples just by inviting me on your show. So thank you for
Uh,
that. And I think just, being an evangelist for what I'm trying to do, which is just to help people. I'm trying to help people do the best work of their lives and to produce a body of work that they're proud of, and at the end of the day, to die empty of regret, to know that they've
yeah.
put their best work into the world. And so that's what I'm trying to do. And so anybody who wants to help make others aware of my work, that's the ripple. That's the ripple that is beneficial to me right now.
Well, you got it. I'm happy to step up to the plate and do my part because I am such a fan and very identified with what you just said, because really at the end of the day you're focused on helping them do a very important piece that, sets legacy for their life. I do the other side, which is to not just do the work but also to build those relationships and those authentic connections that create that richness so that you can enjoy what the fruits of your labor and the fruits of your creative output. And you only do that by having great connections with other people. And so I personally am so grateful that we connected. And I honestly would love to stay in contact, love to have you back, and would like to continue to get to know you and see ways that I can, maybe add value and create positive ripples for you. The last thing I'd like you to share just is how you would want people to find your work, how you'd want them to follow you. What's that best source for you in terms of how they can, learn more about how to get engaged with your books, your speaking, the podcast, etc.
Books are available wherever books are sold. ToddHenry.com is my website. The podcast is called Daily Creative with Todd Henry. You can find it anywhere that you listen to podcasts, and I would welcome. It's been used to be called The Accidental Creative, but it's been going consistently since late 2005. So we're coming up on our 20-year anniversary, which is kind of crazy.
That's awesome. I love that. That's fantastic. Well, Todd, thank you so much for the time today. I can't begin to tell you how much I appreciate it. And guys, definitely go check out Todd's work. Get his books. You will never be sorry because they are full of wit and wisdom, practical ideas and strategies that you can put to work right now that will make a huge difference. And talk about creating a positive ripple for yourself. Do it with Todd's books. Listen to the podcast, and I just want to thank you again, my friend. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode. And as always, ripple on.